let's talk about the illusion of control, because this is where every narcissist story begins and ends. See, a narcissist operates under one core delusion: I can control you. They genuinely believe that through manipulation, charm, and calculated emotional moves, they can bend you to their will. They think they're smarter, more aware, more in charge of the dynamic. And that illusion feeds their ego like oxygen. It makes them feel powerful. But here's the truth: what they mistake for power is actually fragility disguised as dominance. You have to understand, narcissists don't connect with people, they perform. Every word, every compliment, every grand gesture has an agenda behind it. When they tell you what you want to hear, it's not about love or admiration. It's about control. They're constantly running a silent test. How much can I make you feel? How far can I push you? How deep can I pull you? And before you notice, it's all a game. And when you respond, when you give them your energy, your reaction, your validation, they take it as confirmation that the illusion is working. But here's where it gets interesting. Control, by its very nature, is an illusion because it relies on the other person not knowing they're being controlled. The moment awareness enters the picture, the power dynamic flips instantly. It's like shining a light into a dark room. Suddenly, everything that looked mysterious and powerful becomes painfully obvious. That's why narcissists hate self-aware people. They can't play their games in front of someone who sees through the script. Psychologically, this illusion of control is rooted in fear, not confidence. Narcissists are terrified of losing relevance, of being ordinary, of being exposed as inadequate. Their entire identity depends on how others respond to them. That's why they crave admiration and obedience. It's not because they love themselves. It's because they don't. They're addicted to external validation because without it, they collapse. The control they try to exert over you is just a desperate attempt to avoid losing control of themselves. Philosophically, it's tragic. Think about it. A narcissist lives in a self-created prison of manipulation. Every move they make is designed to keep others dependent on them, but in doing so, they become dependent on others' reactions. It's a closed loop of ego maintenance. They never experience real freedom, real intimacy, or real peace. They're chasing the illusion of superiority, but what they actually create is isolation, because you can't control people and connect with them at the same time. You have to choose. And when that illusion starts to crack, when you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop playing, that's when they panic. Suddenly, the game isn't fun anymore. You're no longer predictable, and unpredictability is their worst enemy. They don't know how to function without a script. You stepping out of that dynamic forces them to confront something they've spent their whole lives avoiding: the emptiness underneath their mask. That's the real consequence of their illusion of control. It isolates them from genuine humanity. They can manipulate people into staying for a while, but they can't force true loyalty, trust, or love. Those things can't be controlled, they can only be earned. And a narcissist doesn't understand that. They think they can own what must be shared. So eventually, their illusion collapses. The people around them stop believing the performance. The charm wears thin. The admiration fades. And when the applause ends, they're left standing on a stage of silence, alone, frustrated, confused as to why their old tricks don't work anymore. They'll call you the problem, they'll rewrite the story. They'll try to convince everyone that they let you go. But deep down, they know what really happened. Their need for control cost them everything worth controlling. And here's the truth you need to hold on to. Nobody who plays with control ever wins in the long run, because control is rooted in fear, and fear eventually destroys itself. Love, respect, authenticity. These things thrive in freedom, not control. The narcissist's illusion might look powerful from the outside, but it's built on sand. And the moment you step back, the whole structure crumbles under its own weight. So if you've ever been caught in that web, remember this: The narcissist's greatest weakness was never you leaving. It was you seeing. Because the minute you see the illusion for what it is, you take back every ounce of power they thought they had. And that's the moment their game ends. Not with a bang, but with your silence. There's a moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes explosive, when something inside you finally clicks. You realize that all the confusion, all the self-doubt, all the emotional chaos wasn't random. It was engineered. That realization marks the beginning of the power shift. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What's wrong with this dynamic?" And that's when everything begins to change. The narcissist's control depends on one thing: your unawareness. As long as you believe the story they're selling, that you're overreacting, that you're too sensitive, that everything is your fault, you remain trapped in the narrative they wrote for you. Awareness is the first crack in that story. Once you start seeing patterns instead of isolated incidents, the spell breaks. You begin to notice how every apology is strategic, how every compliment has timing, how every crisis seems to occur right when you start to pull away. It's not coincidence. It's choreography. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the beauty and the pain of awareness. It's liberating, but it also hurts. Because you have to face the truth that the person you cared about was never really connecting with you. They were managing you. That realization can feel like emotional whiplash. But it's also where your strength starts to build. Because now, instead of reacting to their behavior, you start observing it. You move from being inside the storm to watching it from above. Psychologically, this shift is enormous. You go from being emotionally driven to consciously directed. You stop defending yourself and start defining yourself. Narcissists thrive on emotional reactivity. It's their favorite source of control. Every time you argue, explain, or justify, you're feeding their sense of importance. Awareness cuts that supply line. You start choosing silence over reaction, boundaries over explanations. And here's the irony: the less you engage, the more they unravel. They're not equipped to handle a calm, grounded version of you. It's not just about pulling away, it's about reclaiming your perception. Narcissistic relationships distort your sense of reality. They make you question your memory, your feelings, even your sanity. It's called gaslighting for a reason. It makes you doubt the light in your own mind. Awareness relights that flame. You begin to trust your instincts again. You realize that your discomfort was never irrational. It was wisdom trying to get your attention. You were not too much. You were just in an environment that couldn't handle authenticity. From a philosophical standpoint, awareness is liberation. When you stop reacting to illusion, you step into truth. The narcissist's entire game depends on illusion. The illusion of superiority, the illusion of control, the illusion of love. Once you see behind the curtain, you realize it was never about you. It was about them trying to regulate their fragile ego through your emotions. And the moment you understand that, you stop personalizing their behavior. You stop trying to fix them, please them, or prove yourself to them. You simply see them for what they are, and that seeing is the beginning of freedom. Now, this shift doesn't mean you stop caring or become cynical. It means you start caring in a different direction, toward yourself. You learn that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's sacred. You begin to understand boundaries not as walls, but as clarity. You can love people and still say no. You can forgive and still walk away. You can understand their pain and still refuse to carry it. That's what awareness gives you. Choice. The narcissist loses power the moment you realize you have options. They've built their dominance on the illusion that you're stuck, that you need them, that you can't do better, that without them, you'll fall apart. Awareness shatters that illusion like glass. You start to remember who you were before the manipulation. Curious, confident, capable, and slowly that version of you returns. You stop seeking validation and start valuing truth. You stop chasing closure and start creating peace. And here's the paradox. When you stop playing the game, you win it. The narcissist can't compete with someone who refuses to compete. They lose interest because their control has no fuel. But you gain everything they tried to take: your clarity, your confidence, your calm. The shift from victim to aware isn't about revenge. It's about restoration. It's about remembering that your worth was never up for negotiation. So if you're in that moment right now, that painful, awakening moment where everything feels heavy but clear, hold on. You're not breaking down. You're breaking free. You're moving from being controlled to being conscious. And that's the most powerful transformation a person can experience. Because once you see the game for what it is, you no longer need to win. You simply walk away, and that's what ends it. At some point, every narcissist hits emotional bankruptcy. And I don't mean sadness or loneliness. I mean complete depletion. Because when your entire emotional economy is built on taking instead of giving, there's only one possible outcome: you run out of supply. Narcissists live on borrowed energy. They drain empathy, attention, and affection from the people around them, using others like emotional ATMs. But what they never grasp is that real connection isn't a transaction. It's an exchange. And when you only withdraw, eventually, the account closes. In the beginning, they seem rich in emotion, expressive, passionate, even intoxicating. They love bomb, they idealize. They mirror your energy so perfectly that it feels like you've met your match. But it's all performance. What you're really seeing is projection, not depth. They're borrowing your emotional language to keep you invested. They mimic your empathy, your warmth, your openness, and then slowly start taking it away, piece by piece, until you're chasing the very things they once gave so freely. This is how emotional bankruptcy begins. Not just for them, but for you. You start pouring more and more of yourself into a relationship that gives you less and less back. You over-explain, over-compromise, over-give, and all it does is feed their ego while draining your spirit. They mistake your compassion for weakness, your forgiveness for permission. And with each boundary you let slide, they collect another piece of your peace. But here's where it turns. Narcissists don't realize that emotional exploitation is self-destructive. Every lie, every manipulation, every small act of cruelty chips away at their credibility, their trustworthiness, and ultimately their ability to connect. They're burning bridges faster than they can build them. And even though they might move on quickly, finding new people to play the same games with, the emotional debt doesn't disappear. It compounds. Every relationship they destroy takes a piece of their humanity with it. Psychologically, narcissists are emotionally bankrupt because they've traded empathy for ego. They've chosen to invest in control instead of connection. And empathy is what allows you to build lasting bonds. Ego only builds walls. And when your identity depends entirely on being admired, you can't afford genuine intimacy, because intimacy requires vulnerability. Vulnerability exposes the very fragility they've spent their lives trying to hide. So they avoid it, and in doing so, they cut themselves off from the one thing that could actually heal them: authentic emotional connection. Think about it like this. When you remove empathy from a human being, you remove their emotional currency. Everything becomes transactional. Every compliment has an agenda. Every apology is strategic. Every act of kindness is conditional. And that's exhausting. Not just for the people around them, but for the narcissists themselves. Because underneath all that superiority, there's an emptiness they can't escape. It's why they constantly need attention. Attention is their oxygen. But attention isn't the same as love. You can be surrounded by people and still be completely alone when none of those connections are real. Philosophically, this is the great irony of narcissism. In trying to feel significant, they make themselves hollow. They destroy the very thing they crave most: connection. They want admiration, but they act in ways that breed resentment. They want loyalty, but they create mistrust. They want to be loved, but they turn love into a performance. Eventually, people stop showing up. Friends leave, partners walk away, family distances themselves. And all that's left is the echo of their own ego, loud but painfully empty. When the narcissist loses you, they don't just lose a person, they lose their mirror. You were the reflection that made them feel powerful, the validation that made them feel real. Once that's gone, they have to face what's left behind, and for most of them, that's unbearable. They'll try to replace you, rebrand the story, or pretend they've moved on. But deep down, there's a gnawing awareness that something valuable was lost. Not because they cared in the way you did, but because they've run out of people willing to believe their illusion. And here's the shift. While they spiral into emotional debt, you start to recover your balance. You realize that your empathy isn't a weakness, it's a strength that was misused. You learn that love without reciprocity is self-destruction. You stop giving where nothing grows. And that's when your emotional wealth starts to rebuild. You stop operating from deficit and start operating from clarity. You invest in peace, authenticity, and people who pour back into you. So when you look back, you realize something profound. The narcissist didn't just lose you. They lost access to something priceless, genuine love. And once that's gone, no amount of charm or manipulation can recreate it. Because in the end, every narcissist learns the same lesson. You can fake love, you can fake power, but you can't fake connection. And when that truth hits, it costs them everything. There's a point where the narcissist crosses a line, where manipulation turns into something darker. It's when they start believing they can play God in other people's lives. They begin to see themselves not as flawed human beings, but as architects of other people's emotions, decisions, even identities. And that's where the downfall begins. Because when you try to play God, you forget one simple truth: power without humility always destroys itself. Narcissists operate under the illusion that they're untouchable. They think they can rewrite reality, that they can dictate how others see them, how others feel, even how others remember events. They'll lie with confidence, twist narratives, and rewrite history. Not because they misunderstand the truth, but because they believe they own it. That's their ultimate delusion. They don't just manipulate people, they manipulate reality itself. And for a while, it works. They convince others. They convince themselves. They build a world where their word is law. But the problem with playing God is that reality always wins. Truth has a way of resurfacing, no matter how deeply they try to bury it. People start connecting the dots. Patterns emerge. The same stories repeat with different faces, and slowly, the image of perfection they've worked so hard to maintain begins to crack. The mask slips, not all at once, but in tiny, telling ways. The arrogance, the contradictions, the coldness. It all starts to show psychologically. This God complex is a defense mechanism. It's rooted in deep insecurity and fear of insignificance. Narcissists crave control because deep down, they feel powerless. Their need to dominate others is really an attempt to dominate their own inner chaos. By controlling everyone around them, they distract themselves from the lack of control they feel within. It's not strength, it's avoidance. And the tragedy is that in trying so hard to avoid vulnerability, they become completely enslaved by their own need for control. The consequences of that mindset are brutal. When you treat people like pawns, you eventually end up playing alone. Every manipulation, every betrayal, every lie burns another bridge. They may not see it at first, because narcissists don't lose people all at once. They lose them slowly through emotional erosion. People begin to detach quietly. They stop confiding. They stop trusting. They stop showing up. Until one day, the narcissist looks around and realizes that all the admiration and attention they once commanded has faded. They're left with acquaintances, not allies. Followers, not friends. And that emptiness becomes impossible to ignore. There's also a philosophical cost to playing God. When you put yourself above others, you disconnect from humanity. You stop seeing people as individuals with their own experiences, emotions, and autonomy. They become tools for validation, props in your personal mythology. And the moment you dehumanize others, you lose your own humanity too. You can't live in a world where everyone exists to serve your ego and expect to find peace or meaning. You can't be both the puppeteer and part of the play. And here's the part they never see coming. When you try to control everyone, you end up controlled by everything. Their need to dominate makes them slaves to their image. They become obsessed with what others think, terrified of exposure, constantly performing just to maintain the illusion of power. It's exhausting, living life as a performance, never truly being known, never truly being loved. They think they've mastered the game, but the game has mastered them. Eventually, the consequences show up in every area of their life. Relationships collapse. Trust evaporates. Their reputation, once built on charm, begins to carry the weight of suspicion. People sense something off. The facade can't hold forever. The truth catches up. It always does. And when it does, the narcissist faces the one thing they've spent their entire life running from: accountability. And accountability is their kryptonite, because to face it would mean admitting imperfection, admitting fault, admitting that they are human, not divine. But by the time that realization hits, it's too late. The people they hurt are gone. The loyalty they demanded is gone. The admiration they lived for is gone. All that remains is the echo of what could have been, a life that could have been rich with connection and meaning, but instead became an empire of control and isolation. The lesson here is universal. The need to control others always leads to losing yourself. You cannot play God without forfeiting your soul in the process. Real strength isn't about domination. It's about understanding, humility, and balance. And those are things a narcissist will never master until they stop trying to be superior and start learning to be real. So when they finally fall, when the truth surfaces and the illusion collapses, it's not punishment. It's consequence. Because the universe has a way of restoring balance. And in that balance, every false god eventually meets their own creation. In the end, their downfall isn't caused by what you did to them. It's caused by what they did to themselves. There's something almost poetic about the way power shifts when you finally stop reacting. For so long, the narcissist thrived on your energy, your anger, your confusion, your need for clarity. They fed off it like it was oxygen. Every argument, every emotional outburst, every attempt to explain yourself was fuel for their sense of control. But the moment you step back, when you detach not out of spite, but out of self-respect, everything starts to crumble for them. Your silence is not weakness. It's withdrawal of supply. And for a narcissist, that silence is deafening. They've spent their entire life mastering one thing: pulling emotional strings. They know exactly which words trigger you, which tones make you chase them, which silences make you doubt yourself. It's manipulation at its most subtle form. The kind that feels like chaos but is actually precision. So when you suddenly stop responding, when you no longer take the bait, they feel it instantly. It's like pulling the plug out of their power source. They go from being in control to being exposed. They can't process it because their entire identity depends on your reaction. This is what people often misunderstand about narcissists. They don't fear rejection, they fear irrelevance. They can handle conflict. They can handle your anger. What they cannot handle is your neutrality, because indifference removes them from the center of your world, and they've built their entire sense of worth on being the axis of someone else's. Your detachment forces them to confront the void they've been avoiding all along. It's not just that they lose control of you. It's that they lose control of the story. Psychologically, detachment dismantles their narrative. For so long, they've needed you to play a role, the emotional one, the forgiving one, the one who keeps trying. When you step out of that role and their script collapses, they have nothing left to respond to. That's why they often spiral after you detach. Not because they love you, but because they've lost their mirror. You were the reflection that confirmed their importance. And without it, they start to fade. Here's where the philosophical depth of this shift really hits. Detachment is not revenge, it's transcendence. It's moving beyond the level where their games even make sense. It's saying, I see what this is, and I no longer need to participate. And that's powerful, because detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you start caring differently. You start prioritizing your peace over proving a point. You realize that engaging with a narcissist is like wrestling with smoke. You get tired, but you never get anywhere. The moment you stop fighting for their understanding, you start fighting for your own clarity. You stop chasing closure and begin creating boundaries. You understand that silence isn't passive. It's active protection. It's you choosing to conserve your emotional energy instead of wasting it on someone who thrives on conflict. And that's what defeats them. Not confrontation, but calm. Narcissists are prepared for drama. They're not prepared for peace. What makes detachment so unsettling for them is that it removes their leverage. They can't guilt you. They can't provoke you. They can't pull you back in. You stop reacting to their chaos, and suddenly they have to sit with their own. That's when the projection begins. They'll call you cold, heartless, selfish, anything to pull you back into the emotional loop. But once you've experienced real peace, you won't trade it for temporary validation ever again. That's how you know you've grown. And here's something worth reflecting on. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop bleeding. You still feel empathy, compassion, and sadness, but you stop leaking those emotions into a void. You direct them inward toward healing. You realize that saving yourself was never selfish. It was necessary. You begin to understand that walking away isn't an act of punishment. It's an act of preservation. And in that quiet decision, you reclaim everything they tried to take. Your confidence, your calm, your sense of control. The narcissist will try to convince themselves that you'll come back, that you're still watching, still affected. But over time, they'll see it, that your silence isn't temporary, it's freedom. They'll replay old conversations in their head, looking for the moment they lost control. But the truth is, they didn't lose you in one big event. They lost you in every small manipulation that pushed you closer to clarity. And that's the most profound form of justice. You didn't have to expose them, destroy them, or prove anything. You simply had to outgrow them. You stopped engaging in the chaos, and the chaos lost its purpose. Because when you detach, they lose access to the one thing they can't replace, your energy. And in the end, that's how you win. Not by fighting harder, but by finally realizing that peace is power and silence is closure. There always comes a reckoning. After all the manipulation, the games, the pretending, there's a moment when the narcissist realizes what they've lost. Not right away, of course. At first, they convince themselves they're fine. They tell themselves they've moved on, that you were the problem, that they're better off. But time has a way of revealing truth that ego can't hide forever. And eventually, they come face to face with the reality they tried to escape. And they lost someone who was genuine, and they can't replace that. You see, narcissists are collectors of moments, not builders of memories. They chase admiration, but they don't nurture connection. They love the idea of you, the way you made them feel, the way you looked at them, the way you believed in them. What they never valued, at least not until it was too late, was the substance of you, your loyalty, your empathy, your willingness to see the best in them when no one else did. They took that for granted because they assumed it would always be there. They mistook your consistency for dependency. And when you finally walked away, they didn't understand at first. Because in their mind, people don't leave them. They might push people away, discard them, or punish them with silence. But being truly left, that's not part of their script. So they rationalize it. They tell themselves you'll come back, that you're just trying to get their attention, that no one else will ever love you the way they did. But then weeks pass, months. You don't return. You don't react. You've healed. And that's when it starts to sink in. This realization hits them in waves. The first is confusion, because they can't comprehend how someone they once controlled emotionally can now exist peacefully without them. The second is anger, because your peace feels like their punishment. And the final wave, the one that cuts the deepest, is regret, because deep down, they know they ruined something rare. Psychologically, this is where their mask begins to suffocate them. Narcissists thrive on external validation, and when you were in their life, you gave them that not because you were naive, but because you were kind. You cared, you forgave, you believed, you provided a stability they could never create for themselves. But once you're gone, they start to feel the emptiness they've been running from their whole life. The people who come after you can't fill that space, because what they're looking for isn't another person. It's another version of the supply you once gave. And no one can replicate authenticity. You can mimic love, but you can't manufacture it. This is what makes their loss permanent. They can find new partners, new admirers, new distractions, but they'll never find another you. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. You showed up with heart, honesty, and vulnerability. You offered what they didn't know how to value, unconditional presence. And once a narcissist experiences that kind of authenticity, even if they abuse it, it leaves an imprint. They'll spend years trying to recreate it in others, but it never feels the same. Philosophically, this moment of loss is the closest thing to truth they'll ever face, because it strips away their illusions of superiority. It forces them to confront the consequence of their choices. You can't keep playing with people's hearts and expect to win at love. You can't destroy trust and then demand loyalty. You can't fake depth and then complain about emptiness. At some point, life demands accountability, not as punishment, but as correction. And for the narcissist, losing you is that correction. It's the mirror they can't escape. You, on the other hand, evolve. You start to see how much energy you gave to someone who didn't know how to receive it. You realize your love was never wasted. It was misplaced. And now, with that same love directed inward, you become stronger, clearer, freer. You learn that your empathy was never the problem. It just needed boundaries. You begin to attract peace instead of chaos, respect instead of control. You stop looking for closure because you realize you already gave it to yourself by walking away. And that's the final cost for the narcissist. Not just losing someone they couldn't replace, but knowing you replaced the pain they caused with purpose. They can't touch that. They can't destroy it. They can't rewrite it. Because you grew from what they tried to break. You healed from what they hoped would define you. And that's the one outcome they never saw coming. So, when they look back, and they'll realize that in their attempt to win every game, they lost the one thing they actually needed. A genuine connection with someone who saw them and still cared. But by the time they understand that, it's no longer their story to fix. It's yours to live. Because in the end, their biggest loss wasn't your presence. It was the version of themselves they could have become if they hadn't tried to play you. And that's a cost they'll carry forever.